Good morning, folks, on this Leap Day 2024, Thursday, February 29th. Excited to welcome today's guest, Keith Smith. If you don't follow him now, you will want to by the time we're even 2 minutes in. Writes some incredible NBA content, does a lot with regard to salary, works a lot with Bobby Marks, who came up in these last 7 or 8 years during one of those free agency periods, who started with Woj. Does some incredible NBA content, so make sure to follow. He's joining us after this on Network 216. Here we go. Keith, a pleasure to have you on this Thursday, and glad that we could both find a day and during a really exciting time in the league where we can get on and just talk some hoops, man. Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to find a day that finally worked for both of us.
And I think, Keith, place we have to start across the Cavs here. 2 nights ago, Max Strus hit a 59.5-foot game winner. You can almost call it the call heard around the country and Toronto. We saw every major account posting the calls of all three. You had Rafa Hernandez Brito calling it in Spanish. You had Tim Alcorn on radio, John Michael on TV. They were down. Donovan was out of the game. It's like, oh no. Max Strus finished one of the greatest hot streaks ever. Hit the game winner. But then less than 24 hours later, they're in double overtime against the Bulls, who they'd beaten without a problem 3 times this season. And then all of a sudden, you look at the final box score. The Bulls had 74 rebounds. The Cavs had 39. So I think the point I'd love to start with here, Keith, is from your perspective, what's more telling of the Cavs? That the way they finished business against Dallas, or how they just got absolutely manhandled by a big team in Chicago the night after?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the two are they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? I think when you look at their comeback against the Mavs, that showed this team is now fully hit the point where they're not out of it, right? They can get themselves back into games. Max Strus very much shot them back into that game. I mean, even before the crazy, ridiculous game winner, I want to say he hit like 4 3-pointers in like a minute span to get them back into the game. So that part was, really encouraging, and you feel pretty good against a pretty good Mavs team. Then if you flip it the next night, it was almost like PTSD back to the first round last year when the Knicks kind of beat the Cavs up inside and ragdolled them around and got whatever they wanted by just kind of by the end it felt the Knicks weren't even shooting. They were just throwing it in the general direction of the rim and going and getting it. And that's something that's Cleveland's just going to have to get past. They're going to have to figure out how to play against those big physical teams at some point if they want to go where they want to go. In the grand scheme of things, whatever, it's a loss. It happens. Second night of a back-to-back. I know the travel from Cleveland to Chicago is not the most brutal in the league, but it's still travel. And, those things happen. And I felt like they looked a little flat right from the jump. It felt like it took them a little while to really kind of get their footing. It was a strange game from Donovan Mitchell. He seemed very passive and almost unengaged throughout the course of the game, and that maybe is a fatigue thing. He may be a little bit worn down, especially again second night of back-to-back, but he's carried the load quite a bit, especially while Darius Garland was out in that backcourt. So just one of those games, but it does bring up a big for a team that starts 2 bigs. You cannot get manhandled on the boards like that. It just can't be a thing. Otherwise, you have to start to really rethink everything about, is this 2 big pairing the way we really want to go moving forward if we're going to continue to get beat on the boards like this?
And it's a low chance, but there is a situation, there is a world where these teams do meet in the first round should the Cavs hold on and should Chicago advance. Unlikely given who the 7 and the 8 currently are in the East. If you look at the numbers, the Pacers are 5.5 games up on Chicago in that spot. And so with this said, you think about the Cavs' upcoming stretch, Keith, is they're going to have games next week from Sunday through Friday in a row with the Knicks, the Celtics, and the Timberwolves. So with that said, for them, how important do you think this is just for the national perception of the team? All these games are on national TV as well in a row. That for maybe the casual fan and the NBA media, how important are those games for them to kind of make a statement and let them know what they're about?
Yeah, I mean, they're big games. Part of it, the real thing that makes them big games is they're fighting with the Bucks for that 2 seed. And you really do want to get in the 2 seed so that one, you're on the opposite side of the bracket from Boston, who's just been kind of rolling through everybody. And then you are on the position where you are be able to have home court advantage against the other guys. So that would likely be the Bucks in this case. I don't think that any of the teams behind them are going to catch either one of them for the 2-3. So you really want to be in that spot. You in theory should get an easier path through. If you're the 2 seed than the 3 seed, you should get an easier opponent. Who knows who will land where in the play-in tournament and all that stuff. That's all still very up in the air, as is those final couple of assured top 6 playoff spots in the East. But I think for the Cavs, what's more important is just don't get beat up through the course of those 3 games. So the Knicks are injured right now. They've got Julius Randle's not going to play in that game. OG Anunoby's not going to play in that game. So they've got to. That's a chance. That's a game they should win. If those guys are out, they're the better team. They should win. Boston, who knows, right? That could go either way. Minnesota, same thing. Those teams are better teams than Cleveland is. So it's just, go out there, though. Just don't get crushed. As long as you're in those games, I think everybody will feel pretty good about it. But the Knicks game, that's a game they need to win. If that goes the way the playoffs went a year ago, then I think all of a sudden you're going to have a lot of people saying, all right, I don't know how real this team is. Are they just regular season paper tigers, and that is kind of what it is? Or if you get that win and then you're competitive with the Celtics or Wolves, or get a win in either one of those games, all of a sudden I think a lot more people are bought into, all right, maybe this team can make a finals run.
And have you ever seen a team, Keith, go, and yes, this one game does carry a lot of weight because of what it showed, but a team goes 26-6 over a 32-game stretch, best record in the league in that time. They've beaten all the big dogs. They've beaten up on the little teams. That was only the Cavs' third loss of the season to a sub-500 opponent across 27 tries. But have you ever seen a team go that hot, and the way they lose this one game brings up all the possibilities, the 1 out of the 82? Have you seen that before?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Celtics guy and I've covered them for years, so trust me, I get it. Like they come out and lose to Dallas on Friday, and you're gonna have all the same people come out and be like, "See, I told you this team's just not that good." They don't get it done when it matters, and that's just how it goes in the NBA. You're only as good as your last game. People only care so much about where things go. I try to keep a much bigger picture, focus on things of, hey, when you've been really, really hot, unless you are the Warriors and win 73 games, you're probably going to go through a bad stretch too. There's probably going to be a point where you're going to lose a few games. So I think that is the thing you need to really kind of keep in mind here is everybody's going to go through this, but that's just how it is in the world of covering sports today. It's far easier. Nobody wants to lift teams up as much as they like tearing teams down. And then that bleeds over to the fans, and the fans start to feel that way as well. And then we're just in a spot where nothing's kind of ever good enough unless you're the team holding the trophy at the end. I don't believe this, but the way people act is there's one successful team and there's 29 teams that were failures, even if there is measures of success for certain teams that they have had very successful seasons, even if they don't raise the trophy. But that's just not how it's seen.
No, and that really is a good point, because there's so many times you get a team that makes it to the conference finals, they're not expected to. They make the second round, they're not expected to. They take a team to 7 games in the first round, like those Derrick Rose rookie team Bulls did to those Celtics a long time ago with a crazy supporting cast. But I want to ask a Celtics question here, Keith, because you talk about them. This matchup should be a lot of fun. It's 5 days away. The Celtics are now sitting at an incredible 47-12. They brought in Drew Holiday, who's going to play for Team USA over the summer. They added Kristaps Porzingis, and all they really had to give up were injured players, and role players didn't seem to fit what they were trying to do in the pro. Actually, Marcus Smart's a big deal, not to say nothing, but to think about what they added, and he's been out this season. But do the Celtics have a kryptonite? Because it just seems that you look at any stat, because they've only lost 12 out of 59. You look at any player, they have this record when he does that. They're 49-0 when Sam Howell hits 2 threes, for example. They're undefeated when Luke Cornett dabs on people. Like, you could look at any stat, and it seems like there's nothing negative. So from what you've seen of them, is there a kryptonite? Is there a negative? Because it seems like with Horford and Hauser, Pritchard coming off the bench, they're fine. They have a 7'2" guy to back up Kristaps for an emergency situation. Their starting lineup is filled with 4 veterans with playoff experience and a 5th guy that's an insane unicorn in today's game.
Yeah, I think their kryptonite, if we will, is one, it's themselves. When they tend to lose, it's because they throw the ball all over the gym and they don't take care of things, and then they try to shoot themselves out of bad shooting nights, and it just snowballs, and then they lose. But those are happening once every 2 weeks this year. For example, their last time out, they were shooting terrible from 3, and they against the Philadelphia 76ers, and they basically said, you know what, let's just, then we're going to go inside. There's no Joel Embiid, and they attack downhill for almost the entirety of the rest of the game, and they've really got a lot of damage. They solved a lot of the questions of, can they get easy baskets, as far as what can you go to when jump shots aren't falling, and what they go to is Kristaps Porzingis in the post. He's been one of the most efficient post players in the league this year. He's averaging some of the most post ups and post points this season. Jason Tatum's been great in the post. Drew Holiday's been great in the post, and even now Jaylen Brown is coming around to playing really good on post up. So they've really diversified the offense quite a bit and figured some stuff out. I think the other challenge that they have is their rebounding can be a little bit messy. That's cropped up more and more as the year's gone along, especially in the defensive glass. And you're seeing some teams, when they're not having good shooting nights, are staying in games because they're getting on the offensive glass. And if you have a game where all of a sudden it's the other team's getting offensive rebounds and Boston's turning it over, you end up with a shot differential of like 15 to 20. And if you're taking 15, 20 less shots than the other team, you're going to put yourself in a major hole. But, those are things that are all pretty correctable, and they're things that really together only pop up once every 2-3 weeks. And even sometimes lately, when they do pop up, they're not leading to losses because they're able to overcome it.
And it'll certainly be interesting to track as things do go along. The Celtics did add a couple of players since the season started. They brought in Jaden Springer from the Sixers and added an extra big. Xavier Tillman is one of the, I don't know how many. There's not many in the league averaging a block and a steal a game. So we'll see when we get them, which is a nice way to transition to our next section here, Keith, with a big focus on the buyout market. Because tomorrow, correct, if anyone who's a free agent right now can be signed to a playoff team. And we're kind of at the end of the opportunity for guys to get bought out, right? If they're not bought out by 11:59 tonight, then they cannot join a playoff team. Is that correct?
March 1st. So March 1st.
End of tomorrow.
Yeah, end of day tomorrow, March 1st. Yeah, so if they are not waived by tomorrow, a player that is currently on a roster, guys on 10-day contracts don't count. That's a whole different thing. But anybody else, standard or two-way players, if they're not waived by tomorrow, they're not eligible to join a team for the playoffs. So they could sign to a team or be claimed off waivers if they're waived like March 10th or something. They just cannot play in the playoffs. But it's important to note, they just have to be waived by tomorrow. They don't have to be signed by tomorrow. You could sign players all the way up to the last day of the regular season. Right. Cavs fans probably remember Dante Jones. They did it 2 years in a row with him, brought him in, and then he was there for the playoff run. So that's allowed. You just have to be waived by March 1st.
So with that said, to clarify, on two-way contracts, anyone that's on a two-way contract, you said March 10th. So if they're not bought out of that, if they're not out of the two-way, they can't appear in the playoffs. Or is that also tomorrow?
Yeah, March 10th was just a random day I was throwing out. March 4th is the actual last day to sign a player to a two-way contract too. So that's a deadline that's going to fall right on the heels of this. But the March 1st date is called the playoff waiver eligibility deadline. So So that's when you have to be waived by. Then the March 4th date is the last day to sign a player to a two-way, but two-way players are not eligible to play in the playoffs. Doesn't matter if they still have a bunch of games left, NBA games left on their contract that they can be available for, and that they cannot play in the playoffs.
Okay. And then we got some names that have been bought out. There's some guys that haven't yet. So some of the names that are not yet on new teams, for example, Mike Muscala just got bought out. We saw Joe Harris back at the deadline. Killian Hayes is not on the team. The Pistons have Evan Fournier still on a roster. Marcus Morris, technically still a Spur. So who are some of the names that you expect to be that are currently rostered, I guess, to start with, that are currently rostered kind of in that area that you expect to be bought out in this window to try and join a contender?
Yeah, there's none I necessarily expect to be bought out, but there's four guys I'm kind of keeping my eyes on here for the Spurs. You mentioned one of them, Marcus Morris. We'll see what happens with him. That may be a situation where he just doesn't want to give any money back, and the Spurs may be saying, "Great, then you can just stay here and have your contract expire and stay home and not play." I think teammate Jetty Osman in San Antonio is another guy I'd keep an eye on. He is playing rotation minutes right now, but if the Spurs decide between today and tomorrow, hey, we're going to reduce that role, we're going to go with even younger guys, we're going to we've got a two-way guy we'd rather see get some minutes or something like that, you could see him say, all right, hey, can we do a buyout deal then and get me free? Otto Porter Jr. with the Utah Jazz, he's not with the Jazz, not playing, so he's another guy I think we need to kind of keep an eye on of what's going to go on there. Is he going to be in a spot where do the Jazz set him free and can he catch on somewhere? And also it comes down to, is he healthy enough? Because he hasn't been healthy the last couple of seasons. And if he's not healthy, he may be saying, all right, just let my contract kind of expire and we'll go from there with that. And then I had Evan Fournier, you mentioned with the Pistons. As of right now, it sounds like there's no plans to buy Evan Fournier out. It sounds like he's going to stick in Detroit. But again, sometimes those things do change in the next day or so here, where it could be the Pistons say, you know what, hey, we're really not going to play you the rest of the way. And Evan Fournier may say, you know what, I don't really care about my bird rights that much. I'm probably not going to be a sign and trade guy. It's not likely to matter. So maybe he says, let me get somewhere else. So we'll be keeping an eye on all four of those guys a little bit, but there's nobody else really out there of note. There is always a surprise guy or two that maybe pops up here at the last little bit, but nobody else is really jumping out at me as, yeah, this is somebody who we're expecting to join the buyout market.
And of the names that you mentioned and the ones available, can you see with the Cavs still having an opportunity with a roster spot that they could still open? Is there a player you think that would fit what they need and that could maybe even give them spot minutes if they came in?
Yeah, I think Mike Muscala is a guy I think who could help them with Tristan Thompson suspended and still got some games to go on that. Maybe just one more body in there. And he's a little bit of a different big from what they get out of Allen and Mobley, because his whole game is about stepping out and spacing the floor. So he's somebody I think could be of interest to Cleveland if they really wanted to go that way. Otherwise, there's nobody really necessarily overly jumps out at me as saying, yeah, that's the guy. I don't know that there's going to be minutes for anybody else. I know some have suggested like they could use another wing, but I think they're fine with Isaac Okoro and Karis LeVert playing in that role. They seem to like Dean Wade playing the forward spot. So no real, thought from me of you got to go get, a guy like that. I think it's more about, hey, this is more of a break glass kind of player. Like, but let's have him at the end of the bench. And if we really need him, be able to throw him in there. And that's why I think a guy like Muscala could help them. But the rest of these guys, the guys that are available in that, I think you're better off maybe just cycling through a couple more guys on 10-day contracts, see if one of them really sticks, or then you can just wait it out and see, does the next month reveal a need to us, whether it's just a need that pops up or there's an injury or something like that, and go get somebody, because their challenge is they're not super tight to the tax line. Like, they've got enough room to do what they need to do. They're about 1.3 million under the tax line. So that's more than enough to do a prorated minimum contract the rest of the way. But you don't want to have to be in a spot where you go get one player, then something else pops up and you got to waive that guy and go get somebody else. Now that starts to make things just a little tighter to the margins than you want to be. So they may be able to more take let's just take a patient approach and see if something reveals itself here in the next month and a half.
And on the other side of that, not a player that could get minutes, but do you see any veterans available that could come in and just be an extra voice, kind of like Niang and Strus have been for them this year?
Yeah, not really. I'm very fond of saying with buyout guys, most of these guys are more name than game. It's just people recognize them and they're like, oh yeah, go get that guy. And very rarely do any of them have a major impact. You get maybe one or two every few years that are like, yeah, that guy was a major difference in a team making a postseason run. And other than that, it really is like the saying in the NBA is they're on the buyout market, there's probably a reason for it. Like it's generally these guys are towards the end of their careers and they're trying to catch on somewhere else, or they have a very specific skill set that doesn't fit a lot of places, and that turns into all right. We gotta, if we're looking for that one skill kind of player, let's go get them. But yeah, I think for now, I think for Cleveland, nobody screams out at me as like, yeah, there's a guy that would absolutely make a difference for them if he was called upon. Not to say it couldn't happen, I just don't see it.
And you also mentioned, Keith, that the Cavs do have enough money should they want to do that prorated minimum. But with the contract of Okoro coming up, you have to make a decision on Mobley. And the next year, they're already paying Allen $20 million a year. They have to pay Donovan at the end of next season if he opts to stay. They're paying Darius Garland max money. They're paying Max Strus about $17 million a season. Where do you kind of project them if they need to sign Evan and Isaac, and what that might mean to some of these other guys to avoid these penalties that were instituted over these last couple of years?
Yeah, it's really important. This was why they needed to make sure they stayed under the tax this year. And I think that led to the idea of, hey, let's do the buyout with Ricky Rubio versus using his contract as a trade chip to try to stack together with somebody else and go get someone. I think the Cavs' idea was, hey, we need to reduce our salary commitment this year, make sure we stay under the tax line, because I think they know sometime in the next couple of years, they may be a really expensive team where it may turn into, all right, now all of a sudden we are a tax team, and being a tax team is fine. What really gets you though is if you become a repeater team. That's where you get into a lot of trouble, where that turns into now all of a sudden it is, oh my gosh, we are in a spot where those signings for the $2 million minimum signings turn into really a $10 and $12 million signing because of all the penalties that come. And those repeater penalties are only getting more harsh under the new CBA. So I think the Cavs are looking at it and saying, hey, if everything goes the way we want it to, we're going to have this core four of Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, and Allen. Then that becomes filling out around them becomes a place of, all right, we can go into the tax if we need to, if we're really contending for titles. That's the thing to do. They've done that in the past, obviously. So I think the ownership group is willing to do that. But your challenge is let's delay that until we're really there. Because there's no reason to start that repeater clock any earlier than you need to when you think there's a chance you may be very expensive. Because Evan Mobley, even if he hasn't developed, I think, into the surefire all-star guy we all hoped he would be by this point, I think there's still a good chance he's going to be a max or near max guy. And then if you start talking about, all right, how do we retain some other guys, whether it be Isaac Okoro or Karis LeVert in a couple years, or even, all right, what is Mitchell? It's going to be a max guy. We know that. You start adding those all up, you're going to be a very, very expensive team here pretty quick. So I think that's why it's important to dodge the tax while you can.
And then outside of the penalties for just paying more money, does anything come in with the loss of draft picks in that as well?
Yeah, you don't lose draft picks, but what happens is the draft picks if you're up and over that second apron, and this is still a couple years out from fully coming into play, which Cleveland's obviously they're not facing this right now, and they don't have a lot of draft picks to lose anyway. They're still out a few of them, so they've got to sort through that part of it. But what happens is your draft pick gets what they call frozen, so it's moved to the end of the first round, and then you can't trade it. So your furthest out draft pick can't be traded. So that's going to be something that down the line they may be dealing with. Now you hope, all right, we're good enough that it's not going to be a thing for us when we get there. But trades like the trade to acquire Donovan Mitchell, where it was, let's give you every first rounder we can, and then we'll do swaps in between and whatever it is else, even if we go all the way out 7 years, those things are not allowed for the most expensive teams anymore. You could still trade picks. It's just going to be those further out picks. You cannot say, hey, here's every pick under the sun and swap and let's go to make those trades. It really made it restrictive on those second apron teams, which again, to be clear, Cleveland's not there yet. Who knows if they even get there? We're still a couple years out from that being a thing for them. But for now, that is something that I think we need to just generally keep an eye on. Of all right, is this something where this should pop up? What restrictions will they be working under? And that's one of them. Along with that, you lose your exceptions. You can only really sign players to minimum contracts and then sign your own draft picks. That's pretty much what you're limited to, because even the trade restrictions get extremely harsh. It's you can't aggregate players, meaning you can't take a $10 million player and a $20 million player and go get a $30 million player. You can't do that anymore. It's all one player can be traded by himself, and you can only take back dollar for dollar in trades. There's no more little bump on that anymore either. So they really made it tough on those teams.
And do you see a world, Keith, where one of those teams, like, for example, maybe the Cavs in a few years, I look at the Suns as that exact team. Like, all right, they got this real nice starting lineup. They did bring in Royce. They had a good deadline. They got that young. But you think about what they started with. Think about the Lakers the last couple of years. They're just adding minimum or $5 or $6 million a year guys in free agency. Do you see a universe where one of those types of teams ever wins a title? Or is it going to be more so you need that cohesion, you have to build up, or just be super stacked at the top enough that you can overcome that?
Yeah, I think those teams can win titles for sure. I think, we're going to see this playoffs and last playoffs have been kind of instructional, right? You had, like, you used a good example with the Lakers. The Lakers were extremely top heavy last season, and then they were able to trade Russell Westbrook and break his contract up into 2, 3, 4 players that they were able to get that then really helped push them forward in their playoff run. And then you have, this year with the Suns, you're seeing what happens is if you're going to be that top heavy, your stars better be there pretty much every night, right? You better be able to count on 70, 75 games from your stars, because if one of them is missing, the chances of you having the depth to come forward is tough. Like I always say with the Suns, when Bradley Beal's out, it's fine. Eric Gordon steps in, and that's okay. It's then who steps in for Eric Gordon, right? Then now you've weakened your bench production. And Eric Gordon is a guy, he's a 20-minute a night player this point of his career. He's not somebody who can come in and play 30, 35 minutes a night like Bradley Beal can when he's healthy. So that becomes, all right, now we got to replace Gordon off the bench because now he's starting, and we got to find 15 extra minutes because he can't go as long as Beal can. So those are the problems. It's rarely about the next guy up. It's about what happens when you get deeper into that. And then if you end up with 2, 3 injuries, now you're really in a spot where you're in real trouble.
And, we think about what's happening in some of these top teams, Keith. So I want to bring it back as we wrap up. I want to bring it back to this Cavs Celtics, which I think is kind of the centerpiece of this whole conversation, what the Cavs have to do here, what they have to do there, what's Boston done, what they haven't done, and should they meet in the playoffs? And it's been a while. Actually, it hasn't been that long with the LeBron era. I was thinking back to the big three, the big three era. We've had more recent matches, the three of them. But should they meet? So a two-parter for you here. What do you think the biggest on the Cavs side X factor matchup would be? And then the second part is there a universe where they could actually beat them in a 7-game series? Well, yes, there might be a universe, but does that universe exist on our planet? Are we in that universe?
Yeah, I mean, the second one's easier to answer, and the answer is yes. There's definitely a world where the Cavs can beat the Celtics, because if Boston has, a game or two where they just kind of throw the ball away, they don't shoot well, and everything goes wrong, and now all of a sudden they lose those ones. And then Donovan Mitchell's one of those guys who we've already seen it against the Celtics. He's very capable of winning a game almost all by himself. So if he pulls that off, now all of a sudden you're in a game 7, and we all know anything can happen in a game 7. Last year, Eastern Conference Finals, Celtics battle all the way back from a 3-0 deficit. And then in the opening seconds of game 7, Jason Tatum rolls his ankle, and he really probably shouldn't have played the rest of the game, but did, because it was a game 7, did not play well, and they lost. So I think that scenario is very real. I think where the Cavs, in order for them to win, kind of the X factor it needs to be Evan Mobley, has to be a dominant player in the series, and he has to be dominant on both ends. He's going to have to guard Jason Tatum at times, if not predominantly, throughout the course of the series. And he's going to have to do it well. If he can't do that, they're going to really struggle. They're going to have a hard time with slowing Boston down enough. That's what I worry about with Cleveland. These are two teams that generally, for what it is in today's NBA, play pretty good defense. And what I worry about is if Boston can get rolling, does Cleveland have the offensive firepower to keep up with them? Are they going to be able to score the ball enough? Are they going to be able to go out and win a game 125, 120 if that's what's needed against the Celtics? So in order to do that, you need Mobley to be great on defense, and then you need him to be just as good on offense. He has to be a player who's really giving the Celtics trouble, whether it's on the offensive glass or in the short roll or on straight post plays or whatever it is. He has to be the best player. Probably, ideally, either if he's not the best player for the Cavs in the series, is the second best player. Otherwise, they're just going to struggle because Jared Allen with Kristaps Porzingis, not a great matchup, right? Porzingis is going to pull him out. Not the big thing with Porzingis that people miss is when he picks and pops or he spaces, he's not spacing to the arc. He's spacing to 4 or 5 feet behind it. And that's just that much more challenging. Bigs today, even Jared Allen, who prefers to live in the paint, he knows I got to get out to the arc. It's that extra step or two all the way out there. That's where you see the big men are like, man, I closed out to where I feel like I need to close out to. And he's still getting the shot off because, one, he's ridiculously huge and it's hard to impact his shot. And, he's out there, a couple of steps further than most guys. So that's a challenging matchup. And then they're small in the backcourt. Boston is big everywhere. Derek White, Peyton Pritchard are the only kind of small-ish players that they play at all in their lineups. And Derek White plays much bigger than his size, and Peyton Pritchard is a backup. So that's the other challenge is, are the Cavs guards going to hold up? Are they going to put too much on Allen and Mobley to clean up for them? They're going to have to double. They're going to have to do a lot of things that make them uncomfortable, and that's where it gets to be a challenge.
Would certainly be a series should it actually happen that would, for better or worse, capture a lot of attention, and one that I would welcome should the Cavs make it to that point. So it would most likely have to be a conference final matchup. But hey, right, crazier things have happened. The 8-seeded Heat were 3 wins away from an NBA championship, right? So
yeah,
basketball's crazy like that. But
yeah, it's I'm not going to be at all surprised if we are sitting here a few months from now and Cleveland's in the conference finals. It would not surprise me at all. I think they're on par or as good as a lot of teams. I'd pick Milwaukee over them. I think the Bucks it's taken them almost 2/3 of a season to figure things out a little bit, and maybe the coaching change is finally starting to help and sink in. But I would pick Milwaukee. But for Cleveland, this playoffs we're kind of out of the excuses period for the Cavs now. Last year was the first year they're in the postseason. Well, I guess they were in the postseason the year before in the play-in tournament, but first time in the playoffs. And I always give teams, when it's especially as a group, their first time as a playoff run, and they had very little playoff experience. It was basically Donovan Mitchell, and then I think a handful of games for Jared Allen and Karis LeVert. So no real problem there. A lot of teams lose their first playoff run, but now it's all right. You've had that experience. You saw what it was in the playoffs. You saw what the physicality was, how it amps up, what it's like to play the same team multiple times over a 2-week period. You know what it looks like. So now you have to figure this out. You need to be better this time around. So, they're going to answer some questions when we get there of, all right, is this the group? Or otherwise, this summer, I think you're going to start to have bigger questions asked of, all right, what changes do we need to make to try to figure out, all right, who are the guys and how do we put this all together?
Hopefully those conversations can wait, right? But basketball is a game that does not respect the norm. That's literally the tagline of the league is where amazing happens. So for better or worse, whether it supports your team or against it, every time a playoff team wins a series, it is something amazing, whether they dominate or win close, because they had to beat the same team 4 times in 7 to 10 days, sometimes 15 days. And that's what it is. But Keith, I want to say thank you very much for coming on. A pleasure talking hoops and hearing about what we might see in the next couple days, because the free agency action is obviously far from over. So I'm glad to get it from such a well-respected source than you and Spotrac.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
And then one more time for everybody that may not know Spotrac, they may not know the name. I mean, a lot of people know that I know the name. 140,000 people on Twitter know the name, but where can we find the writings? And
you can find all my written work at Spotrac. I write there about contracts and rosters and free agency and all that stuff. We're kind of in a little bit of a lull here now as trade deadline has passed. We had a bunch of trade deadline pieces. I wrote a reaction piece to every single trade deadline trade that was made, or every trade that was made this year. So if people want to check that out, they can. But then we'll have team offseason previews and free agency pieces and all that coming up here as we get closer to the offseason starting. And then you can also find just general NBA work and thoughts over at the Basketball Bulletin. That's something I do with Trevor Lane, our Substack. So you can just go to search the Basketball Bulletin Substack and it'll pop up. And we've got a bunch of stuff up there that I think you like. Then if you like, podcasts and YouTube shows and whatnot that cover the news and notes around the NBA and transactional stuff, NBA Front Office Show, which is also Trevor Lane and I's show that we do. We do that every day, Monday through Friday, where we cover everything, all the ins and outs across the NBA.
I'll be absolutely certain to check that out. Big shout out to Keith Smith. Great talking ball today. Zach Weiss with you as always across the Cavs. Next game is tomorrow against the Pistons. Hopefully they avoid the same fate as the Bulls. But until then,